Hello, my name's Heather Parsons and I've written a book called Atlantis Revisited. It is a collection of 56 channeled short stories from Atlantis, from the very beginning to the cataclysmic end and just beyond. The stories are linked by a narrative from a high priest in Atlantis called Searle, and I would like to read you a little bit of the narrative. Book. Right, the story of Searle. I was an important priest in Atlantis, as it was my job to write down much of our culture and to ensure its continuance for future generations. In Atlantis, I was known as Searle, but you probably know me better as Plato, the Greek philosopher who brought the stories of Atlantis back to the world in the 4th century BC. I am also now known as the Ascended Master Dual Kul. I would like to tell you a little more about life in this mythical land, for the stories that I gave the world when I lived as Plato were altered, as if by magical gremlins, to be given a life of their own, and a life which was not entirely true. Atlantis is a land that time nearly forgot, a place from ancient times and a land of intrigue. The evidence for its existence is questionable, but the memories of this fabled land can be found within the memory banks of millions of people who once walked its streets, sat and listened to its orators, and became involved in its life. These memories can resurface in meditations or while listening to the haunting flute music which once filled its streets as it wafted down from the temple complex. Atlantis was not very large, about 12 miles in diameter. It was not exactly an island, but joined to the mainland by a broad causeway, passable in all but the stormiest of weathers. A few people knew of its existence, and very few ever walked its pebbles across to the mainland, as everything we needed was to be found within our land. Atlanteans did not want to interact with people from the outside world, for we were happy within our land and knew no different. The city of Atlantis was founded by a natural inlet around which the first buildings had been constructed. Over the years, this inlet had been enlarged into a lagoon, and it was here that the dolphins came in the evenings to be fed. We also built broad canals carrying water around the city for irrigation and washing out the sewers. Surrounding the temple area was the marketplace, just like any market in any town in the world. There was a daily throng of people with baskets full of their colourful wares of fruit, vegetables and clothing. This area was full of life as people haggled over the prices and met up with friends. Next to the marketplace was a debating area where people could discuss the affairs of the land and problems with their fellow men. This ensured that small issues rarely blew up into large ones. Any disputes that could not be settled by debate were arbitrated by special priests, and their decision was final. The power base of Atlantis lay completely within the priesthood and was evenly divided between men and women. The priesthood were distinguished by their height and lack of facial and body hair, fine features and pale skin. Their heads were free from hair because of a genetic link which helped to set them apart. The strict rules over who they could marry kept this racial purity as they saw it. It was the first attempt at eugenics and breeding a master race, and like future attempts was doomed to failure from the very beginning. Atlantis was a place where great innovations in technology were allowed to flourish. They were originally sparked with help from the spirits. In some cases, even today, over 10,000 years later, people have not equalled some of their ideas. The climate of the area was hotter and dry with scrubby vegetation. Our ancestors had learned how to control the climate within a giant dome, but more of this later. The centre of this land under the protection of the dome was almost tropical, with lush growth and high humidity. This microclimate allowed us to grow all manner of food, including strange juicy fruit unknown in the world today. We had plentiful herbs, fish from the sea, and many goats for meat and milk. Bread was unleavened and freshly baked daily in clay ovens. Food supplies were never a worry during my time in Atlantis. There were a number of villages around the edge of Atlantis for the fishermen and farmers, and these comprised whitewashed single-storey shingle-roof dwellings, simple but adequate. The city of Atlantis, though, was truly incredible. The towering pillars of the temples rose high and dazzled those who gazed on their marble columns and sculptured friezes and walls. The area of the temple complex was amazing, but reserved only for the priesthood. Normal people were encouraged to visit regularly for a healing of their choice, As being allowed to visit this area, they were kept in awe of the inherent power within the priesthood. Atlantis was a hierarchical society like no other. During its founding work, everyone worked as equals until it became apparent that this could not continue, and the fledgling priests began to take power for themselves and to set up guidelines for living. As the city was close to being finished and the Great Dome was activated, everyone wanted to be allowed to live inside this golden citadel, but not everyone could. The priests had the power to decide, and hundreds were left shouting and wailing outside as the barriers arose. The priests chose people who were useful to society, and also those who they liked. The misuse of power had already begun. Many of the people excluded were angry, as their ancestors had spent generations helping to construct the city, only to be excluded at the end. Only allowed to visit it, or to be one of the invisible people cleaning up the detritus their betters had left behind. The simmering discontent which this produced remained for generations, gently being stoked up from time to time, but underneath was a smouldering cauldron just waiting for a flashpoint, which came much later. The guidelines were strictly followed and policed by people with special powers to remove individuals who were flaunting the laws. The displaced people had a trial and were then removed to the outlands where the living was tough. There are many stories in this book about this magical but also dangerous land. It was an experiment of a sort over a way of life, set up with good intentions, but based on altruistic control of the masses, and in the end had to be left far behind. Ours was a society of secrets within secrets, with many groups thinking that they were privy to the greatest secrets and having to keep them safe within the group, with special passwords and meeting places. However, the real secrets lay with the 12 priests of the labyrinth of the mind. These were the most powerful priests in the land. Initially, they held all the secrets to the dome. The maintenance of the barriers, the crystals, and the important secrets were only ever kept within the minds of these 12 individuals. There was no resignation from this high office. Death was the only release, and a new priest would be trained and duly appointed to fill this important position. Although I was very important in Atlantis, I was not one of this elite group. I did not even know of the existence of this secret group at the time, and yet I thought I was one of Atlantis' top priests. It was only from the other side after death that I could see the truth, and the 12 individuals of such importance seemed humble and insignificant at the time. None of the ones I knew appeared powerful. None had what you could call charisma, yet they held such power and held it in secret for the whole of the time that Atlantis stood. The land of Atlantis ended with a disaster, but the stories told by its descendants remain, as do the memories within every soul who walked its streets. Gradually, over thousands of years, the fabled land became lost in the mists, and its stories mixed with so many other tales of magic and mystery. It was real, though, and I have tried to bring light onto this fabled land. It is from my writings in ancient times that the world knows of Atlantis. I had seen this land during times of deep contemplative thought, where I felt I had actually visited this place, walked its streets and seen its buildings. As Plato, I was an idealist and always have been. I saw glimpses of this land, and I interpreted what I saw in the light of what I wanted to tell the world. My agenda was to persuade people that it was possible to live in harmony, in grace and in light. Like all writers, I let my creativity rise to the fore, and I created the world others wanted and needed to know about. We all needed Atlantis as a beacon of a world where people could coexist in perfect harmony. This story was created to set people's imaginations soaring from the restrictions that life imposes, and in so doing it let people's minds soar to places new and exciting. New worlds are always possible, and just because the world we know today is full of greed and self-interest, it does not have to be like that. The world can be anything we want it to be if the will is there. There are always new pastures waiting to be explored. The world has never been as it is today, never been so small, and with the World Wide Web, never been so well connected. Someone in a modern city such as New York is only a few mouse clicks away from terrorists such as Bin Laden, or from their idols across the globe. It is a chance of fate over how we live out our lives, a chance of birth, and the memories of lives gone by, where we are when we were all similar people to these. Atlantis is a dream world, not in its physical presence, but in the perfection of its lifestyle and the peace of most of its inhabitants. As Plato, I cited it near the Pillars of Hercules, but there are different Pillars of Hercules, and it existed firmly in the Eastern Mediterranean. As Plato, centuries before Christ, I was not privileged to see the complete picture. Now, as the world is collectively moving on into a new era, more and more light can be shone onto old mysteries, and the timing of Atlantis I gave was slightly misleading. This was not me deliberately misleading the world, but was simply what I had truly picked up from the energies of the past. The legacy of Atlantis lives on in the imaginations and the hope of many people. As to Al-Kul, I have always wanted to cut to the heart of the matter and give the truth. The truth itself is so beautiful and links us all together as brothers and sisters around the world. Atlantis did have amazing truths in it, which we are beginning to remember once more. There is an amazing upsurge of old knowledge now combined with technology which can help to make the world a far nicer place. Atlantis existed for thousands of years and gives a snapshot of what in some ways was a perfect civilization. But for evolution at all levels to advance, Atlantis had to be left far behind. Spiritual evolution or enlightenment involves being completely free to make choices, including the bad ones, which are not necessarily wrong in the long term. These decisions allow an individual to experience a full range of what life has to offer, and in the end to remember all that they have learned, learning empathy and compassion along the way. Atlantis prevented this process from occurring, as it in effect cocooned its citizens in a pink fluffy cloud of eternal optimism. The dreams of Atlantis still live on deep in the subconscious of so many, even after thousands of years. Atlantis had been so different from every place before and since that the idealism, even though it was flawed, still forms a pivot point in the soul. These ideas helped form the communities that came after in the land of Babylon, the Minoans in Crete, and in many others yet to come. If you are interested in the book, it is available from my website, which is www.angelsrus.co.uk. Thank you very much.